not only for energy transition, but also towards this whole journey of decarbonization as a country. And I'll keep the points of the company a bit later we can discuss, but I think one needs to look at, and you also in your opening remarks did mention about developed countries and developing countries or emerging markets. Should they be treated same, or should there be a differential treatment? Should there be a access to affordable finance from the developed countries to the developing countries to ensure that there is a transition on energy? Yeah.
Thank you, Chanakya. That's a key point, right? It's sort of like, yes, fine, we're happy to transition out of fossil fuels and coal, but how are you going to enable us to do that if you insist that we cannot invest in oil or gas or coal being the dirtiest of them all, as we all know? Daniel, your opening thoughts.
Hi, good morning. My name is Daniel Mouen Makoua. I will make the case for nature in a fairly informed way and cooperative way. I'm from Cameroon. I live in the UK. My background is in finance, so quite a lot of finance people here. I was in quantitative finance, and then about 10 years ago, I left the city and I started a farm in Bboxx State near Lake Chad. I farmed sorghum, black-eyed beans, millet, and then my farm was stopped because of Boko Haram, and I became also advisor to a couple of governors in the state. And following that, I went on to advising sovereign fund in Nigeria and in Ghana, and advising the oil company there. So I'm pretty grounded in finance and oil and gas, but I also realize that we're facing some significant challenges. And as you know, we are on to our 3 degrees, so we busted the 1.5 degrees. And that's a reality. And in relation to Africa, the single most issue, poverty is an issue we should address. And charcoal is something that people need. And unless we address that, we won't have any forest left, and we will have floods in every city. I was saying as a prep to my colleague that we may see some of the oil field completely flooded, so with a complete impairment of the assets. And so the point is not so much to have an antagonistic position, but realistic position of the situation where we are, and making the case from somebody who has negotiated on the oil and gas and know the brutality of what it means, but taking the case for nature and with the same element of passion, but also realism, and is something that I feel very strongly about.
I just want to echo the point around this. This doesn't have to be an antagonistic discussion, and it seems to me that part of the issue stems from people kind of adopting these binary positions. It's either this or it's that, which also comes to your point around realism, and perhaps realism is a word that we should keep at the back of our minds when we have this conversation, because it seems to me that perhaps what's needed is a dose of realism when it comes to this question of financing for the energy transition. Now, as we've established, we have people with a background in finance, people with a background in oil and gas. So we have a panel that is quite well versed in market realities, and Roger and Anthony, I'd like to pick your brain on this. How is the market reality impacting your work? Roger, you're in, let's just for argument's sake, you're on one side of the equation, you're an oil and gas company. Presumably the market reality is squarely against you. Anthony, on the other hand, shouldn't the market realities be strong, heavily in your favor? You're trying to do solar. What are you seeing those opposite ends of the spectrum?
Yeah, well, I'll go first.
Go for it.
You went last time. So, if I look at our business, and what we've done is we've put transition at the heart of our strategy of our business. Yes, we are an oil and gas company, okay, but we've designed our business around three main areas, 3 main pillars or legs, or whatever you want to call it. Sure. The upstream oil and gas leg, and that's, it's getting as efficient as we can, because the reality of life in Nigeria, we physically cannot borrow enough money to fund the transition. We have to do a mixture of borrowing money, and we have to then also monetize what we have today from our resources. It's a very important point, but we must do that efficiently and very carefully. And then our second leg is our gas business, and that gas business is growing quite rapidly. So we're probably, I think after government, we're probably now second biggest within Nigeria, or certainly will be when our new gas plant comes on. Now, that is not, we're not apologizing for this at all, because that gas fuel will actually, in our view, will actually create a transition. And here's why. Because, what is the transition into our third leg, which is renewable energy and power, right? So we're a molecules company today, right? We're not an electrons company. We haven't converted that molecule to electron. But we're going to need to, right? Because the reality is that Nigeria specifically, but wider Africa, needs access to electricity. This is what's happening all around the world. It's happening in Europe, US. When we talk about transition, all that's happening really is combustion engines are going from the roads, and grid systems are getting bigger and more expansive, so we can have EVs on the roads. I mean, it's kind of what we're talking about in transport. You need a functioning grid system to be able to allow that to happen, which you have in Europe. So for us is we want to create a functioning grid system for Nigeria, which is going to allow that transition to happen. Now, when you tie it back to finance specifically, for us, we actually have a real range. We have a Eurobond, we have local banks, we have big international banks. And financing institutions will work with you, provided that they can understand, where that money is going to and how that money is transitioning. So if you just said, I'm going to be an oil and gas only, it's very difficult to do that today. If you're saying this is the transition where your funding is going to create the following into the future, that is a much easier understanding for the institutions to do that. And so when you went back to 2017, and we were looking at some of our earliest fundings, 2017, no one talked about ESG, right? No one did. It was a sort of a new concept. Now you can't have any dialogue without ESG. So what you've done is you've moved slides from slide 48 to 41 into slides 2 and 3. And you talk about what you're doing in the ESG and what you're doing in transition. And because we put it part of our strategy, we found being able to fund it.
Okay, so there is space, even with the dogma of no more fossil fuels. How receptive has the market been in that respect, especially internationally in conversations that you have?
Well, so what we do is, let's put show of hands. How many people in this room went into the woods yesterday, cut down a tree, and got wood to cook on last night? I can't see any. Is there any hands? I can't see any hands. No. That's not the reality here. Okay, that is the reality in Africa. 80% of energy for cooking is coming from wood, and that's what you're talking about.
It's about 95%,
or even more than that. Now, and it's deforestation. Now, the reality of life is that's not good for anyone. So when you look at to balance this, it's not just about environment; it's about the social aspects. So what we're saying is that, and look at Nigeria specifically again. Nigeria's got one of the most expensive electricity prices on the planet, okay? Because Nigeria is small-scale diesel and PMS generators, probably 15 to 20 million of them in the country, which is creating electricity for the populace, right? So if you look at that any wonder why there's the healthcare, the schools, the employment, none of that appears because electricity prices are far too high. So when you talk about blending the social with the environment, that is where it resonates with the funders. They can see there is a social need to do this transition funding, rather than just say, you're an oil and gas company, I'm not interested in you.
Okay, we'll pick up on that, but I want to bring in some other perspectives. Anthony, life must be easy for you. People must be throwing money at you. Solar in sub-Saharan Africa, it's not an easier sell on earth.
I wish I would.
All right.
So I'll take a deep sigh before I actually answer that question, and I'll answer it as in a politically correct way. when I left investment banking 3.5 years ago, I left as global head for debt products at Crédit Agricole. And one of the reasons I came into this business, because I did think that should be the case, that renewable energy transition, everybody thinks it's a great idea. We can bring our financial expertise to structure these products. The fact of the matter is that when you look at the majority of the products, and it was interesting listening to what Roger was saying about the grid, right? If you take Africa, or even if you take the global south, the numbers that you look at in terms of people that actually don't have access to energy, right, are humongous. So in Africa alone, there's 600 million people without access to energy, any kind of clean energy. And that's not to talk about access to clean cooking, clean water. Healthcare is even something that you need to, it's a dream, right? So you would expect that there's financing behind this, that there's, with everybody's ESG policies, with all the DFIs, with all the interest from the governments, et cetera, that the financing is, that we're turning down offers. The fact of the matter is, the reality of financing is always looking for yield. Financing is always looking for return. As somebody who's been a banker for 30 years, yes, the social impact is great, but you can't measure the social impact in terms of dollar returns on your balance sheet, on your P&L. So as long as, and the problem that we have in a lot of these renewable projects is that they cost money. They're expensive. The return on them, if you look at the green bond performances, they're probably one of the lowest in any kind of sector. The return isn't yet there because we're still developing this sector. And to develop this sector, you need developmental finance. You need patient finance. You need concessional finance. Part of what we're actually looking at doing is not just a financial play. As you were just saying, and I think we discussed with Daniel earlier on, it's also a social play. So therefore, what we need to do to make these things happen is develop financial tools that are actually appropriate for the sector. Right? One of the anecdotes people make is that when you go and buy organic eggs, right, or eggs that are made from organically fed chickens, they're always more expensive than your normal eggs. If you buy, there's a reason why McDonald's is a lot cheaper than when you want to eat really healthy food, because it takes a lot of investment and a lot of time. So when you take somewhere like Africa and you say to people that don't have access to food, that don't have access to electricity, that don't have access to healthcare, and then you want to do all these really great programs like putting EVs in the streets or stuff, or charging things, it's not what's needed today. What's needed today is for us to get off the base level. And the problem is that the base level from a traditional financing perspective is not profitable. So the only way that you can make it profitable is to bring in blended finance, right? What is blended finance? Blended finance is where you take the traditional investors like the venture capitalists, the banks, the hedge funds, all these guys with a whole bunch of money, and you actually bring in money from public funds as well, and you blend finance in that way. So you say to the guys, we know you need, if you're a BlackRock, or if you're a Carlyle, or if you're somebody else, you have 100 million, 200 million, or all your staff expect you to do something. Right? The only way you can guarantee return for your shareholders, for your investors, is if a government comes in and underwrites, let's say, the first loss piece of what you're actually doing. Now, providing healthcare, providing access to electricity for your people is a social responsibility. And that is something that governments should step up to do, to be able to say to guys, okay, we'll provide you a first loss guarantee, or we'll provide you some kind of mitigation for your risk that you're going to take. Because there is a bunch of cash out there. But we speak to DFIs, we speak to all of them, the people who want to invest. The reason why projects fail, or why projects don't get investment, is when you come to the hardcore, when you look at the numbers just don't work. There just isn't the return. There is a niceness, there is everything, the stories are great. We call something, a company we call it the dream cell, right? So the dream cell is fantastic. You have all these pretty pictures of people. We do like UNICEF adverts. You have pretty pictures of people, kids in suffering, with their books. You do all those adverts. At the end, if you want to attract finance to it on a sustainable basis, it's got to have a return. And that's where the problem is.
So it comes down to the bottom line.
Yes.
Yeah. And it sounds a lot easier said than done, as described. Chanakya, you made the observation earlier that energy transition for Tata Steel looks quite different in India compared to, say, the UK or the Netherlands. In terms of the financing, and you already stressed the importance of access to affordable finance, how do you approach these different geographies differently? How does the financing differ depending on the geography?
So I think I tend to agree with what was being said a bit earlier, because I think every geography has a different reality. You talked about market reality, and I was also thinking to myself as to what is the market reality. Forget the energy transition piece and the financing of the energy transition. The reality is that the requirement of, let's say, a hard-to-abate sector like steel, when I look at the European market, there are many countries today which are actually saying, why are we producing steel in this continent? Why should we actually produce steel or manufacture steel in Europe? Why not just do away with it and procure it from the other countries which has access to labor, skilled manpower, lower energy costs, and so on and so forth. So the market realities are very different from that perspective as well. Having said that, I think when I look at what we have just announced about a month back in UK, which is that moving away from the blast furnace technology of steel making to electric arc, is primarily on account of the cycle of steel making and the maturity of the geography that we are talking about. Now this particular initiative, if I have to take in India, government will at this stage not step in because of one reason, that there is no policy enablements right now. They are still working on it, and the cycle of the change is going to take more time. So the financing piece will not come in from that side. Access may be possible for a company like ours because being a part of Tata Group, there is a global market which is available. But if I say that I need this funding for Europe, it will be possibly easily available. If I say it's going to be for India, it's not going to be available at that interest rates or at whatever availability, affordability, for the simple reason that the market reality of India is very different. Today, the customers in India are not even looking at how you are producing steel in India, whereas the customers in Europe are looking at how are you producing steel in Europe and how much carbon footprint does it bring in. And the customers are ready to pay a little more for the product, which is very different in India. So the access to the financing possibly for a Tata Group company, Tata Steel, is there, but it will depend on which geography I'm asking for. If it's going to be Europe, possibly it is available. For India, it's currently not being available at the same terms and conditions.
And what are we to make of those realities? I mean, it smacks a bit of hypocrisy, which is something that that people. It's a point that people make when it comes to the discussion around the just energy transition. It's sort of like, how come I can get the money here, but I can't get the money here?
Yeah, because I think anywhere where the funds will or finances will get available, they'll also look at the returns. So I think that's why if you look at the transition in India, because I'm again taking example of India because we are 2/3 productions from India. As a country, we are somewhere about 40, 50 years behind our goal. The Indian target is 2070. Tata Group, Tata Steel target is 2045. So I think currently if I'm looking for finance for doing anything in India, everyone will ask us on what are the returns, where is the return on your product coming from, because we are producing more for the domestic market, and hence the domestic market has two players. One is the customer, the other is the government. Both currently are still deliberating in terms of what should be the policies, what should be the stakeholder play in terms of what government should bring to the table, what manufacturers should bring to the table, and what the customers should bring to the table, which I think from a European piece, they are much ahead and mature, and hence possibly it is available from that perspective. Again, it takes us back, one solution is not what will be possible for the whole world. We'll have to look with a differential model for each place. Having said that, I think even in India, from the energy transition, as a company, we are highly invested in newer technologies which are coming in, including the scrap technology for electric arc furnaces. But again, in India, the availability of scrap is a big issue. We are already utilizing about 10 to 15% scrap in our full burden of raw material, which also increases our cost of production. But the customer is today not really buying the idea of lower carbon steel, paying higher amounts. Plus, we are also looking at renewables ourselves. We are doing whatever we can internally as a company. We have also tied up with renewable power companies who are producing through solar and others, and we are buying out from them. But currently as well, 50 to 60% of our energy sources are thermal, because predominantly in India it is thermal. Even in the UK, the conversations have just started in terms of how to get in renewable power at an affordable cost once the new furnace comes in a few years' time.
Daniel, what's your take on market realities in financing for the energy transition?
Well, I think the 2 points I would like to make, but before that, I should say that we are present in Scotland, we're looking at North America, and we looked at Nigeria, we looked at Guatemala, we looked at Romania, and in each cases there was no bankability in what we were doing, and we have a duty of care to people who hire us to undertake restoration of ecosystems. The two things which I think are relevant, and by the way, I thought, being able to engage with steel industry and oil and gas industry in an active way of looking at the issue is very positive in my opinion. It's not an easy discussion, but it's a necessary discussion. You can reduce risk by looking at nature. If anything, if we don't address the poverty, the charcoal issue, then by 2070 there probably will be no forest left. When I look at Nigeria, I look at the stock of biomass, and you could do it. You need a tree of a certain size to do charcoal, and that charcoal goes to Lagos, it goes to Port Harcourt, it goes to, in my case, in Cameroon, we lost 2,000 hectares in my father's village. There's just sand left because Douala needs charcoal. And this means that you have extreme rainfall because of the increase in temperature and floods. Right. So there's a direct link, and then you can impair your assets if you do not address that. So nature is important, and I'm speaking here about impairing your productive assets. But there is also the restoration aspect, which is if you embrace these, you're more likely, and genuinely, no greenwashing, but genuinely, then you're more likely to find that asset owners, people who invest in your companies, will look at it more favorably. And so embracing it means, for example, the gas to power initiative, and then pushing it down to the communities that do not have necessarily sufficient income to sustain the de minimis capital investment that they need to make. Those are things that I think, when it comes to nature, are quite critical.
Any thoughts or observation, further comments on what's been said so far before we move on? No?
Well, look, just linked to, I think the deforestation is an enormous issue it's not getting enough attention, I don't think. And people just don't realize how big it is. And I look at it, you get 70-80% of forests being eradicated, and I think you're right, you're not far away from sand and flooding and everything else. The initiatives that you can bring that through, we have one particularly, it's called Tree for Life, and we've just been trying to sort of work out what is the best way to do that across Nigeria. Do you create employment by creating trees that create a yield, like fruit trees and stuff like that? And that's got a positive to it, but the only downside to it is it's hard to scale it, the scale you need very, very quickly. So we're looking at then replanting huge swathes of forest to be able to do it. And what we do is, and we don't apologize for this. We know our gas plants have LPG, and LPG is bottled gas, and bottled gas is used for cooking, and it's avoiding deforestation. So it's very easy to pick on hydrocarbons and say it's all very bad, but if that hydrocarbon is then avoiding something else happening, there's merit to it. And I think we've got to just look at, there's no one simple solution, and you've got to look at a combination of solutions that works.
I would like to add to this. I think it could be even the single most highest contributor, just to provide LPG to people in towns. You don't need to go to the rural areas. What happens is that, you know, people who look for charcoal, they gradually go further and further from towns. And so by providing and meeting this basic need is something that probably would have the most significant contribution to reducing deforestation. And incidentally, we talk about 3% contribution, but when you take into account the deforestation, the poor agricultural practices, you start to be significantly greater.
I think, sorry, I think one of the, I smile when I listen to these comments because they're very appropriate. We're on the ground, right? We're in the villages, we're with these, we sell, these poor people that we're talking about, these guys who hack down the trees are our customers. We sell LPG, we try to do clean cooking, we're doing the transition, but one of the things, we're going to spend more time still talking about this thing over the next 10 years unless we address some of the reasons and the main causative effects. These people are poor, right? One of the things we have in our business model is trying to see how we can even sell a canister of gas, LPG, as a transition gas to a poor person. And it's incredibly difficult. When we sit in these rooms, some of these people don't even earn what it costs to buy this bottle of water here. So then we're talking about taking away the only way they have for their livelihoods that they've had for the last 100, 200 years to eat, to cook, and we want to replace it with something else.
I'm not saying that.
I'm not saying you're saying that.
Focus on the people in the towns.
No, but I disagree with that.
You don't need to go in the rural area.
No, but you do. The issue with that, right, is when you look at the majority of the population, if you look at the 600 million people we're talking about in Africa, most of them don't live in the towns. And the focus that we have generally is that everyone focuses on Lagos, Nairobi, Accra, all those places. But what you don't see is that majority of the population is outside of those places. And those people deserve for their voices to be heard as well.
Again, I challenge that. I think we're probably 50-50, and then we'll be trending towards 60 in towns. And then we get to a European or Western world ratio. So I think that, yes, but even if you focus on the towns, if you just focus on the towns, the fastest population growth, the highest energy consumptions, you could start putting a tick in the thing.
Statistics, facts, and reality on the ground disproves all of that stuff. Go to India. Look at how many people live outside of Mumbai. Go to Nigeria. In Nigeria, which you know very well, only 20 million people live in Lagos, right? Or in the big hubs, you've got maybe 40 or 50 million people in total that live in Lagos, Ibadan, Jos, any of these other big cities. Everybody else, that's 60-70% of the population, lives outside the big cities. And I agree with you to the extent where you talk about focusing on the big cities, because that's what we report. That creates headlines. But it doesn't have the impact. And I can tell you that for our business, 70%, 80% of what we do is in the rural areas. And I would invite you to come and see the impact that it has on these people and the changes it makes on their lives.
Yeah, leave it there for now.
Yes.
So I just wanted to add, thanks for bringing in the India example as well, because I tend to agree that there are not many people who live within the cities or the main towns of a country. Quite a number of people are living in actually the rural areas and the forest areas, and especially because we are also into mining, most of the mining reserves are in forest areas.
Yeah.
So you have to de-reserve to get the mineral out.
Yeah.
While you de-reserve or you deforest, you just can't create that biodiversity. It's not only a tree to a tree.
Yes.
It may take you 20 years, 40 years to get a tree back, but the impact on the biodiversity is huge. It's huge. And I think we do our studies and we kind of work around in a way that we minimize that impact. But the larger point is that any of the projects which are now coming up, at least in India I can see, 35 to 40% area needs to be forested. And though they talk about, they say green cover, but it's not parks and gardens that you create. You actually go and plant native species of trees which can grow faster. The soil conditions are such, it will help, and the weather is such. Otherwise, we are all seeing the climate change impacts across the world with floods and rainfalls and stuff like that. I think the larger point here is that even for the coal mining that we see in India, most of it is open cast. Hence, it destroys the nature, which has a larger impact. But there is no alternate available by virtue of which you can switch off and switch on. And it's only a transition which will, in some way, just transition, which will help us to create a balance.
Any more thoughts? Any more comebacks before we move on? No? So one of the themes that's coming through here, and I'm glad that it is, and I suspect that's a reflection of the different perspectives we have on the panel, is that when we speak of the energy transition, we, unsurprisingly, but I would say perhaps mistakenly, tend to focus almost exclusively on the energy bit, like the production of that energy. Like, is it coming from renewables or is it coming from fossil fuels? And it's sometimes, you know, the debate is conducted as though that's kind of it. Of course, the interconnected nature of the energy transition, it permeates through every aspect of the economy. And as Daniel's pointed out, well, you know, guess what? If you do nothing to preserve nature in 20 or 30 years, your oil assets might be completely worthless, right? Because of the environmental devastation that comes through. So there is a need to, one, grasp the systemic nature of energy in how economies are run, it seems to me. And that touches on a point that we've kind of hinted at, that fundamentally this has to be a collaborative effort. This isn't about what are the oil and gas or energy companies doing, what are the renewable energy companies doing, what's the government doing. There has to be some sort of coming together here. Now, I don't want to start sounding wishy-washy or NGO-like about it, but I would like to get your thoughts on the need for collaboration and what some of those building blocks maybe are. Who does what? What might that look like, Daniel?
Yeah, so before we start, there is one additional variable, which is population growth. And that's sovereign, that's government policy. But you know, if you don't address it, then you really go into non-sustainable situations. So I think, yeah, sorry, I thought you think strongly about it. But, yeah.
Please, floor is open. Just.
It's very encouraging to see that both on the steel and the oil and gas, nature is a preoccupation. They have operational and constraints that makes it quite difficult to be not impacting. But it's by accepting that we need to find compromise that we can solve things instead of taking strong views and having a conflictual type of position. But that also requires that both sides are truthful and willing to address the issue.
I want to pick up on that word compromise and turn to you, Roger. Now, one of the interesting things that we've seen in recent weeks is we know that Europe is in many ways leading the charge of the anti-fossil fuel brigade. Germany being a very, how should I say, a very enthusiastic, leader of that march. But I've also noted with curiosity that the German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, seems to be developing quite a taste for Nigerian energy and gas. He was in Nigeria quite recently. He just hosted a big Compact with Africa meeting where a deal was a $500 million deal was announced with, which included gas from Nigeria. That smacks a little bit of compromise to me. Is some realism creeping in here in terms of the role of fossil fuels in this transition?
I thought you were going to try to predict what COP28 we're going to say next week. Yeah. Look, is there some realism coming? Yes, there is. Is it coming fast enough? No, it's not.
Correct.
It's not. And the reality is, you know, you got to weigh up people's right to develop, right? You got to balance that right to develop with environment, and they can't be competing, right? Because if they compete, we're never going to get there. So, you know, when I look at, if you go develop north or rich, they call it rich north, but well, develop north, I mean, carbon or GHG emissions don't respect any border at all, right? It doesn't matter where you put them in the world. It has the same effect. And develop north is really all about rushing as fast as they can to EVs. And obviously there's a lot of pressure groups in Europe, right? But you can see what's happened to European governments, because European governments are going, that worked for a while, Ukraine crisis happens, energy security kicks in, and people go, well, okay, we said we were going to do that, but actually start that coal plant up. UK is now just licensing oil and gas, right? So there is hypocrisy, it's realism, right? People need energy security. That's pure in the way it is. And if I look at the Africa trilemma, right, which it is, you've got the bit between energy security, affordability, and sustainability or transition, right? And it's welded right on affordability and energy security. And that's the Africa issue and the developing world issue. And until we address that, we're never going to move off that. So I think there's a movement towards it. I'd just be interested to see what happens in COP28. It's in an interesting part of the world that uses a lot of energy. But let's see what comes out with it. But I suspect it's going to be still too slow. And if you look at Paris, you know, on the commitments, you know, we are heading towards 3%. Maybe I've read some stuff, maybe it comes a bit under that, but it ain't going to be at 1.5. That's for sure at the minute. So we do need something way more radical to change how things happen. And like this session's about finance. If you look at, I'll just say this specific on the finance. If you look at it, it's incompatible. Like, you know, if you want to do, you know, renewable energy in Africa, you're probably going to get 5-year money. Maybe you're going to get 8-year money. You're definitely paying over 10% for it, right? You are coming with a whole host of whistles and bells attaching to it, and you heard that yesterday. It's saying, and there's a reason why Africa has the second lowest defaulting in development, because you can't get the money. And the only project you can get the money are sort of the bulletproof, watertight ones, right? So the reality is, if you don't address that, you're not going to move this ahead. So what we need is 15, 20-year money. We need it at, you know, 5% or sub 5%. We need to address currency, which is probably one of the biggest. Local currency is going to be one of the biggest things that, if you're looking at, say, renewable energy or looking sort of infrastructure in these countries, generally the revenue stream for that is going to be local currency, or it should be at least local currency. But actually all that infrastructure, because you're not building it in the countries, you're importing it, is in hard currency. So you've got this massive mismatch as well, and you throw that in. So you need development money that's going to go long term, it's going to be cheaper cost, and it's going to deal with the currency conversion. And I don't see that from development money. I think development money is coming in saying we'll compete against private sector banking money. We're just trying to get the deals. And actually, why don't they just work together? Why don't they work together? And actually, I'll shut up in a second, but you know, your interesting one, which is first risk or first loss. You know, the other one is construction, right? So we all know when you're building your next big plant, your highest risk is when you're building it, right? But when you've built the thing and it's working and it's going to produce for 20, 30 years, that is where development money should be, in that 20 to 30 years. But it requires development money to refinance private sector banking money, and you go to development money, they say we don't do refinancing. So,
excellent. And I actually like sitting next to you. A couple of very good points you made there, which I'll probably just follow on from. I think we need to get away from just what we started off with. We need to get away from just talking. To address a couple of your points, what do I think is going to come out of COP28? I think a lot of more of the same. right? It will be the same as what happened in COP 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, whatever.
So
right?
major breakthroughs then.
Well, yeah, major breakthroughs. There'll be lots of good stuff said, but we're doing it, anyway, I won't get into those, right? But in terms of what is going to happen that affects 2030, what is going to help us along? So if you look at the targets that were set in terms of the 2025 targets that were set in terms of private finance that's actually needed to bridge the gap in terms of financing on the energy transition, I think it was about 780 billion that's actually needed, right? Of that, there's still a gap as of today. We're almost in 2024. There's a gap from the private side of about 430, 450 billion, right? That hasn't even been addressed. None of that money is there. Now, everyone here represents a venture capital company, a private company, a big oil company. Everyone said, oh, we put 2% of our funds under management dedicated to ESG. Everyone does that, right? What nobody does is deploy it, right? And there's no compulsion to deploy it. No one's held accountable for not deploying it. Everybody makes up, as you rightly said, a number of times I've sat in front of a DFI that gives you the same, oh, it doesn't meet these criteria, there's too much risk, there's too much whatever it is. It's crazy. You can't find, if you invest in Kenya, for example, the Kenyan shilling has gone from 100 shillings to the dollar to 150 or 160 to the dollar in the last 2 years. Ghanaian cedi has gone from 6 cedis went to 16 at one point, and then when they got the loan, went back down to 12, 13, right? Naira has gone from, I took loan Naira at 450 or something like that. It's now, if you can get Naira to the dollar, it's something between 1100 and 1200, right? It's not sustainable if you look at that just from a private perspective. So when we come back to talking about collaboration, when we come back to talking about compromise, and maybe for sometimes some of the Commonwealth nations, because we're in the Commonwealth Forum here, maybe we should also stop just looking to the West and expecting somebody else to bring in solutions, right? There is enough money in Commonwealth countries, right? We see this by the opulence, as there's more Rolls Royces in Nigeria than anywhere else in the world, right? There's enough money locally that can underpin the development of these countries themselves. We just need to make sure we have what's called the right policies and regulatory environment, and actually use that money to underpin the development we want. Why do we go to the World Bank looking for a loan when we spend money, when we build the same roads, the Third Mainland Bridge gets built 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times with the same amount of money? So at some point, if we want to de-risk and get the venture capital, private money to come into the world, into this part of the world, we've also got to create an environment that makes it worthwhile. And we look at it in terms of saying there are 3 parts of this. There's the upstream, midstream, and downstream. Upstream is where you make sure that you have the right policies and regulatory environment that people believe that if they come in and invest, you won't have a change of government and all of a sudden your money
Almost out of time. So.
Yes. Then you have the midstream, which is actually making sure that you have the right projects that can actually be financed. And then downstream, which is basically making sure that people actually get their return from these kind of projects.
Daniel, you were going to comment on it.
No, I think I would defer to.
I was just thinking, because you did ask about the collaboration and then we went into something else, but I think, and he did make a very valid point in terms of the population and population growth. So I think if I take both together, I think these things will have to go hand in hand. You will not be able to achieve whatever are the targets that any country has set for itself without looking at the economic growth of that country as well. Having said that, collaboration, I don't think the word compromise is the right word. It gives you a little bit of a negative connotation, but I think collaboration is the way forward. I was also trying to rethink in terms of the Paris COP, where it was said that there will be a climate finance fund which will get created.
Correct.
Out of which, the right kind of projects anywhere in the developing world will get out and get it there. We should look at what has happened from then to now, and let's see what happens in COP28. But I don't think we made progress there. A lot of discussions of this kind we've been seeing, and they're increasing day by day, which is good in a way because people are getting more and more aware. But I think it's also time to move forward in these discussions and ensure that something is done on the ground. Coming to collaborations for a steel sector, I think there's a huge collaborative journey which is started already, because it's with the academics. You need more and more technologies to come in to help you do this transition. and academia can really help us. So we've also set up something in India, something in the UK, Warwick University and all that. We are trying to see what are the newer technologies which can be brought in. We have a few technologies which we are working on, but they're all at pilot stage. When we reach that commercial stage, we'll see how the finance comes in, because that's where this climate finance fund will help us to bring in those. Back home in India, government is setting up a fund. They've already set up a fund for some of these projects which will help you to transit faster, especially for the hard to abate sector like steel, power and cement and all that stuff. So I think collaboration is one of the biggest solutions, I think, which will help us go across to the other side.
Daniel, any final thoughts? We're almost out of time.
No, I think I would agree, collaboration, pragmatism as well. So we are project developers. That means that we do our pre-feasibility studies, we do our planning, and we, you know, I think that's what needs to happen. You know, we've start with a small project and make sure that it's meaningful and you can scale. But just, you know, cut the bullshit and just get to work.
You said it. Okay, we have to wrap up here, unfortunately. Clearly, there's a lot more to be said about this topic, but perhaps some takeaways for you. One, we all agree on the energy transitions. Got to happen. The fine print is on what terms, and financing is a key sticking point. Someone has to fund this stuff. Collaboration, realism, and less talking and more walking. Let those be your guiding principles for the rest of the day. For now, please join me in thanking the panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we are now going to take a coffee break, and we're going to get that light fixed. We're doing 30 minutes, is that right? Okay, so we'll be back here in 30 minutes. Thank you.